Hello, and welcome everyone to the 2021 Shared Value Leadership Summit. I'm Laura Tillman, a director with FSG, which is a not-for-profit social impact consulting firm seeking to create equitable systems change. The Shared Value Initiative, which organized this week's event, sits within FSG and is a global platform for leaders seeking to address societal challenges with business solutions. Over the next 2 hours, we will hear from leaders talking about their efforts to address climate change. As we know, a stable, livable climate is foundational to everything else, from our health and safety to the success of our businesses. To avoid the most catastrophic impacts of the current climate crisis, we must end fossil fuel use and decarbonize our economy as quickly as possible. Thankfully, there is growing momentum from the private sector. According to the United Nations, commitments from private companies and local government have doubled in the past year. Nearly 80% of CEOs surveyed this year stated the need for more sustainable business models. And right now, the international community is meeting for the UN Climate Conference, known as COP26. The private sector is playing an important role, with commitments to end deforestation and increase climate finance, among others. Building on these commitments, companies have a tremendous business opportunity to decarbonize our global systems for energy, food and agriculture, transportation, industry, and more. Leading companies, like the ones we'll hear from today, are rising to meet the need. Yet, current actions are far from enough. We must increase our collective ambition, both for what we hope to accomplish and how quickly. Our speakers today will demonstrate what this kind of ambition looks like and how to move from concept to action. We'll hear from companies who are addressing not only their greenhouse gas emissions, but also some of the root causes of the climate crisis. REI is mobilizing around the intersection of racial justice and climate action. Enel is decarbonizing energy infrastructure and delivering more equitable energy access. HP is rethinking the growth at all cost narrative and moving toward more circular practices. These companies are not only acting on a moral imperative, but also innovating to find opportunities at the intersection of their business and a just transition for the global economy. Given the enormous business opportunity and the need for action today, the climate crisis presents a critical shared value opportunity. I look forward to spending the next 2 hours learning from companies that are leading the way. Before I introduce our first fireside chat, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Through the generous support of Merck, 3M, Abbott, HCA Healthcare, Procter & Gamble, and Sanofi, we are able to provide free access to an amazing roster of speakers and their ideas for equity and change. Also, a few housekeeping items today. Today's sessions are being recorded. For sessions with audience Q&A, please use the Q&A function. And if you're on social media, please use the hashtag and handle noted on the slide. Now, I'd like to introduce our first fireside chat focused on climate action and racial justice. Wilma Wallace is Chief Diversity and Social Impact Officer for REI Inc., where she shares her passion to make the outdoors accessible for all. Prior to joining REI in 2017, Wilma was Interim General Counsel for Enveritas, a sustainability startup working with smallholder coffee farmers in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Before that, Wilma spent more than 22 years as an executive at Gap Inc., where she oversaw legal, compliance, government affairs and public policy, and sustainability functions. Vivian Long leads REI's national and local marketing, channel planning and execution, communications, and member loyalty and customer relationship programs. As the co-op's Vice President of Marketing, Vivian is a member of the senior leadership team and works to ensure REI remains relevant with current members and resonates with the next generation of customers. And finally, John Harper is a managing director at FSG and our moderator today. John brings an explicit focus and commitment to racial equity and uplifting the voices of historically marginalized communities to his work with social change agents across the sectors. John, over to you.
Thanks so much, Laura. I want to get started today with some statistics and some stories. What I'm going to share is specific to the US, but I think also relevant to the global adventure tourism industry, which just for the record is expected to grow by about 10% over the next decade. So let's start with some stats. The outdoor industry comprises about 2% of US GDP. Prior to COVID, it was growing faster than the economy as a whole. The outdoor recreation industry accounts for about $887 billion in annual consumer spending, 7.6 million in jobs, and 125 billion in federal, state, and local tax. Yet, soaring temperatures, extreme weather events, smoke-filled skies, degraded lakes, all these things reduce access to outdoor recreation, and in turn, the goods and services and overall economy that connect people to the outdoors. Let's think about some stories. Here in Atlanta, my new favorite outdoor activity is going swimming or out on one of our local lakes. While I'm there, though, it reminds me of the town of Oscarville, Georgia. It's a historic Black town that was actually burned down in 1912 by an angry mob. That same town was later flooded to create Lake Lanier, which is Georgia's largest lake today. As I pack up my gear to go up to Lake Altoona, my mom tells me stories about growing up under segregation and that she and her sisters weren't allowed to go to Lake Lanier, and they were only allowed at the Black side of segregated Lake Altoona. These stories aren't unique to just my family or Black folks here in Atlanta. Rather, BIPOC communities across the nation have similar complex histories, land stolen, labor not acknowledged, that all inform how we define the outdoors and frankly, how we participate in that industry, right? Helps you understand why maybe only 90% of visitors to America's public lands today are white, right? In fact, until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, Black people in many states were legally outlawed from participating in these parks and spaces. So what do these three things mean, right? Growth of the outdoors industry, risk of climate change, and historic realities of systemic racism, they all have tremendous relevance for an industry leader like REI Co-op. So I'm so grateful today to be joined by Wilma and Vivian to share a little bit about how you all are understanding these things and frankly, what you're doing about it, right? So let's get started. I'll start with you, Wilma, and maybe let's dig in on the climate piece. Tell me a bit about how REI's approach to climate action has evolved over the years and sort of more particularly how you're thinking about it today with some of the more recent devastating impacts.
Hi, John, good morning. And thank you for that moving introduction. Both Vivian and I are so pleased to be here joining you and SVI at the Leadership Summit. So REI has been a values-led business for more than 80 years. I think we're having our 84th or 85th anniversary coming up. And concepts yet of equity, diversity, and inclusion are really embedded in our foundation. When you look at our mission, which is to connect every person to the power of the outdoors and engage them in the fight to protect it, that's foundational to us. You know, we evaluate ourselves based on 4 measures of success, unlike public institutions, public organizations, and even private companies. The health of our employees, our members, our business and society is what we actually measure ourselves on. And then core to our company values is this idea of for all, right? That the outdoors, as you just referenced, the outdoors should be for all, not for all people in certain parts of a certain lake, but it should be for all. And it's part of our mission at REI to help all people see themselves and thrive outside. And then we're also a cooperative. It's REI, the cooperative. And at its core, a cooperative is established on principles of equity and inclusion. So these concepts are fundamental and foundational to what we are and how we exist. Now, with that said, you know, prior to the reckoning and awakening that many of us had in 2020, much of our D&I work, and we call it READY, Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, work was isolated in various parts of the company. HR obviously was focused on workforce. Philanthropy was focused on contributing over $90 million over the period of time to various philanthropic organizations. We had a government affairs program or government affairs function that was working on ensuring equal access to the outdoors at the policy level. Vivian was leading an organization that was committed to inclusive marketing, but REDI concepts weren't truly woven throughout everything we did. It wasn't fully integrated in a way that it needed to be able to have the impact that we desired. And frankly, as a predominantly white organization in a predominantly white industry, the outdoors industry, we were looking at much of this work through a very white normative lens. It's hard for me to say we because I'm not white, but as an organization, we are looking and we're addressing issues, we're operating as a business through a very white normative lens. And like many companies, the murder of George Floyd was a wake-up call to us. So in the summer of 2020, we were also coincidentally, maybe serendipitously, embarking on a redesign of key aspects of the co-op. And we call that our transformational strategies. So the confluence of these two events, us engaging in a real transformation internally from a business and a commercial perspective, and then the societal unrest, discord, and awareness allowed us to lean more heavily into our REDI work, race, equity, diversity, inclusion work, and try to integrate it into all aspects of our transformation strategy. So we spent over a year engaged with FSG and John and his team in developing a REDI strategy, which included three components. One, awareness and capacity building. So ensuring that we were educated and understood the role of race in this country. The lack of equity and inclusion was one of the first efforts that we engaged in. And that led to strategy design and alignment. And now we're in the planning and implementation stage. So in June of this year, actually, we committed to being an inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist organization. And our commitment to that translated into two strategic territories. The first territory that we knew we needed to address in order to become an inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist organization was to transform the co-op from the inside out. From the inside out. And for us, that meant changed mindsets and changed behaviors. And when we talked about changed mindsets and behaviors, what we meant was developing relational trust, both internally and with external partners, particularly those who've been impacted by us, whether it be through climate change or through inequities on a race or ethnicity or other marginalized communities. And then committing to precise and long-term impact. We were in this for the long haul, driving systems change because it's systems that have gotten us to the place we are. The systems needed to be reviewed and potentially dismantled, and then ultimately to engage in reparations. And then the second strategic territory that we knew we needed to address in order to move forward with our vision was to create lasting impact externally. And for us, that meant through three different areas: advancing environmental and climate justice, supporting local economic development, and opportunity and fostering well-being. And those are three huge buckets that we're now in the process of distilling down and prioritizing, trying to understand what the work in those buckets look like for us. But before we dive too deeply into that, we know that there's still work we need to do around embedding those REDI mindsets and behaviors, those muscles, those ways of approaching work that need to change in order for us to ensure that we're moving forward with our vision, again, to be multicultural, anti-racist, and inclusive. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of the journey, that the epic journey, sometimes it felt like, that we've been on to try to meet our goals and our vision of embedding ready concepts into the way we think about business, the way we think about climate, and the way we think about how we engage with our members.
I so appreciate that, woman. That resonates so much with me. And it was certainly a journey we're still on together, and so grateful to be alongside that journey with you. I want to get Vivian in here a bit. You know, two things come to mind for me, Vivian. One is when I think about the co-op, this really unique differentiator, the idea of members, right? Your members actually play a core role in your business engine. When you think about engaging that 20 million lifetime members, what comes up for you for that? And then number two on that, what sort of business opportunities does this approach unlock, this intersection of racial equity and climate action moving forward?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, John. Our members are so important that they are a core part of our business engine, but they are also a really core part of our impact engine. So we know members really love, our 20 million members really love the outdoors. And we also know that if you love something, you're more likely to protect it and preserve it for the future generations. And we also know members very much share those values with us, and they want to make an impact. So we've created in this last year ways to enable members and our broader community to participate more directly in areas like advocacy and philanthropy. So beyond buying goods and services to help them get outdoors, they are participating more directly in issues like climate change and racial equity and diversity inclusion. So for example, in advocacy, we have created what is called, we call cooperative, REI Cooperative Action Network. It builds on the co-op's decades of policy work and gives everyone an easy way to take a stand on legislation and policies that impact the outdoors. The second way is through philanthropy. And this fall, in the last few months, we've launched the REI Cooperative Action Fund to scale investment in the outdoors. So this is a new community-supported public charity that funds a national network of nonprofit organizations promoting justice, equity, and belonging in the outdoors. So there are two ways, most recently, that we've really opened up for members. And most importantly, we're not only inviting our 20 million members, but collectively, we're also asking our 15,000 employees, our vendor partners, our nonprofits to all join us in participating in uniting together to support these critical issues. So on a business opportunity standpoint, the commitment to READY is more meaningful when it's tied to the core business engine. It cannot be separate. And I think that is really important learning that we've had on our journey over the past year. It has to be tied to our ability to grow. So there's two ways that we think about the business opportunity. Membership growth, and most importantly, REI is looking to grow from 20 million members to 50 over the next decade by 2030. The members that we have today are different than the members that are demographically important. And historically, we have invited a section of the population. And what we are looking to do is really represent and invite in the full scope of the demographics that we know are going to be very important to the US. So people of color, younger than 40, critical. The second way is we have just in this last month, in October, announced a new business venture fund. It's a $30 million fund to invest in founders of color. And not only is it the right thing to do to correct underrepresentation in the industry, but there's also a very clear business case. So two things, in the next 10 years, so by 2030, our intent with this $30 million fund is to add 200 BIPOC owned or led brands into REI, representing about $1 billion in cumulative sales. And we'd like to achieve about 15% of our entire assortment from founders of color. So just two ways that we're looking at business opportunity.
Yeah, I so appreciate those reflections, Vivian. It's so exciting to hear the ways that racial equity and these concepts aren't seen as only impact, only the sort of charity components, but rather how does this live at the core of our business? How do we actually use it to fuel our business strategy? What does the path towards 50 million actually look like? I'd love to step back a minute as we think about not just those commitments, but some of the path to get here, right? So many companies made commitments last year. And then you all have now been on this journey. Would love to hear your reflections, advice you have for leaders that are trying to do this work, that are trying to bring racial equity either more to the core of their business or uplift it. What sort of reflections or aha moments did you all have over the course of the past year? Vivian, I might start with you. Sorry, as you take a sip.
Step in, Vivian, if you're still having your morning cup of coffee.
No, I can go, Wilma, thank you. So John, a ton of learnings, but I think the one that I would share is the importance of really thinking about how you use data. And often, data is super important, particularly, as just leaders and whether it's for business purposes or for impact purposes. It's important to understand who your customer, in our case, our member, what are insights about them, what are their needs, unmet needs. And I would just caution that in looking at data, it's really easy to be hyper analytical and to start to segment and really get really fine-tuned in areas that can be really, really disruptive. So I caution against getting overly binary, male, female, white, black, and really appreciate that there's a lot of intersectionality, and you need to look at the whole person and to really move away from identifying very specific slices of identity. My advice is to look for and use data for good and helping make communities better.
Yeah, it resonates so much. It's instead of looking at sort of identity, it's thinking of understanding those barriers, those needs, and then how do we design to the barriers or needs? That way we're serving multiple identities along the way. Wilma, same question to you. What sort of aha moments or reflections come up?
So, we talk about this work in the context of a movement. And I think movements take time, whether it be the civil rights movement, gay rights movement, marriage equality, those movements take time. And particularly when it requires a change in culture, a change in behaviors and mindsets, and the breaking down of systems that have led us to the place we're at, and the inequities and the marginalization that we're experiencing. So I leave the audience with a plea to be patient, but act with urgency, in integrating these commitments into your organizations. As you said, it's very easy to make a statement. It's much more difficult to live into it. And sometimes business is more focused on action than long-term sustained results, just because of market pressures, because of stakeholder expectations. So I would resist the urge to go fast and potentially miss that foundational work that just has to be done. And also to prioritize internal learning and change. It's going to come from within. And I know the unlock for us about 9 months into the work was that it wasn't the work we were choosing to do that needed to change. It was how we were doing it that needed to change. We needed to make sure that the voices who weren't in the room weren't being considered, were being considered. We needed to challenge ourselves on the automatic systems and approach and natural way of doing things, whether that was the way to approach this work. And we're still learning and resisting the temptation to pull out the project plans and the Excel spreadsheets and the PowerPoints. So I would encourage people to lay down on some level, the ways and approaches that we're used to doing things and be willing to take this work on with a bit of a leap of faith and a curiosity, as someone just said yesterday, might have been you, John, open the door, be willing to open the door, walk through it, and see what's on the other side.
Yeah. So much of that resonates. I can't claim that one. I wish I would have said it, but it certainly resonates for me. I mean, part of what comes up as both of you all are reflecting is, I think oftentimes business leaders see racial equity or climate justice or any of these as options that one must be forced to make a choice around, right? I am either coming out in front on climate justice or I'm coming out in front on racial equity or some other social issue. I think what resonates for me and what you just lifted up, Wilma, specifically, is this idea of it's so much more about the how that you go about doing this work versus the what, right? We could pick almost any industry issue and still apply that ready lens that requires that full transformation that you all just described. And so so much of where the co-op has landed is really at this intersection of continuing great work around climate action, yet how do we leverage this internal transformation around ready? Bringing these concepts of targeted universalism, bringing these concepts of using data a bit more intentionally to understand systemic challenges, not just personas, right? How do we use the concept of bringing others into the fore, into these conversations, so we're not just sitting at HQ with closed doors among senior leaders making decisions, but rather engaging the 15,000 employees, engaging that broader 20 million folks, right? It's about leveraging that full scope of the co-op's business, of the co-op's work, in order to move things forward. We have a little bit of time before we wrap up and move to our next speakers. Any final thoughts that either you, Wilma, or Vivian might offer up to the crowd today?
This takes leadership and courage. And I think one of the learnings is, as I said, bringing other folks into the fold. But I also fundamentally believe that the leaders of organizations need to be setting an expectation and a message, and have the courage to step out of the norm that they exist in, we exist in, and examine our practices through, again, this ready lens. It takes intentionality, it takes courage, and it takes patience.
Yeah.
I so agree with Wilma. There's an element of really being able to think about going slow to go fast, and this is it's the long game. I'd say for me, John, it's really important to see there's so much opportunity and upside in this work. I think often it's seen as something we have to do, and people lean into the moral imperative. But I see this as really about innovation and how do we really serve in a much broader way. So I think there's unlimited opportunities, and if you think about it from that lens, I think you would see different, see things that maybe you wouldn't if you thought about it just from a moral imperative standpoint.
Yep. It's the balance of the two that makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to thank you so much for the time today. Always a pleasure to spend a bit of quality time with you all. I imagine we'll spend a bit more time over the coming months. So excited for today's conversation's ability to really start today at this intersection of climate action and racial equity, realizing that these aren't trade-offs, but rather changing the way that we go about pursuing climate action creates incredible opportunity for how we also think about transforming communities. So with that, I will turn it back over to the SVI team.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Wilma, Vivian, and John. That was a really insightful discussion on thinking about racial equity and climate action. I think it's so much of what you said really resonates, thinking about that internal journey, thinking about the business opportunity, and really how to tackle this in a deeply intersectional way. There's so much there. So we appreciate so much you sharing what REI has been learning and where you are in that journey. It's wonderful. Yes, wonderful. I think we are just gearing up for our next fireside chat.
Yeah, Laura. It's yes. Bobby. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're just waiting for one of our other speakers to join us. But as we wait, again, I want to underscore great conversation with REI. I want to thank John, Harper, Vivian, Long and Wilma Wallace for that great discussion and just sharing with us very authentically their journey. I think this work, I think Wilma said it well. She talked about from the inside out and the journey that their leadership team has been on in terms of really embracing the fact that this type of change does take time, as they said, and it does require some internal reflection about your own beliefs, your own ability to see the system that might be holding inequities in place. A tool that might be very helpful to those of you in the audience who are interested particularly in racial equity, but I think it could help inform broader forms of equity, is the CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity. There's a 2021 version that was published just a few months ago and really would encourage you to get on that. And hopefully someone on the team can plug that into the chat so that you can have access to that tool. But it looks like our next speakers are here, so I'm going to turn it back over to Laura to introduce them.
Thanks so much, Bobby. I'd like to introduce our next fireside chat with a leader of one of the world's most innovative energy companies, Enel Group, headquartered in Italy with operations in over 30 countries. They are a power company changing the face of energy. Antonello Camisecra is the head of Global Infrastructure and Networks Division for Enel. Prior to that, he was sole director of Enel Green Power and director of the Africa, Asia, and Oceania region. He was also director of the North and Central America region and held various other positions within the company over his 2 decades plus tenure. Matt Hamer, senior features editor, oversees Fortune's long-form storytelling and manages their op-ed and commentary desk. Matt is a co-chair of the CEO Initiative Conference and is the lead editor for Fortune's annual Change the World list. For this segment, we'll have time for audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A function if you have a question. Matt, I'm handing it over to you.
Laura, thank you so very much. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm also just honored to be sharing an event with the SVI group. You've been such great partners with us on the Change the World list over 7 years now, so thank you so much for that. And Antonello, thank you for making time to talk with me.
Pleasure.
So, yeah, I'm glad you're here. So more than 1 billion people around the world essentially have no access to electricity whatsoever, and hundreds of millions more lack reliable electricity, lack affordable electricity. To be shut out from electricity essentially means to be shut out from the modern economy. Without reliable electricity, people can't access the tools that power commerce, finance, employment, education, healthcare. So obviously this is an essential good. And of course, COVID-19 and the pandemic circumstances have highlighted the gap between those who have it and those who lack it. At the same time that we want to reach these people with electrification, we also have the imperative of decarbonization, right? The climate crisis is highlighting the need to transition to low carbon economy so that basically the future of the planet is secured. So we have these two contrasting, difficult to balance goals, essentially, between electrification for those who need it and decarbonization for the planet. Enel, of course, is a leader in this space and aims to be a company that truly drives this transition. And Antonello, you've committed to progressing towards a sustainable energy system in line with the UN's SDG 13 climate action goals. And that means, again, harmonizing these two ambitious goals of decarbonization and electrification. So how are you and Enel tackling both simultaneously?
Oh, thank you. This is a very broad and comprehensive question, which I think as an answer will require, let's say, quick, easy description on what we mean for energy transition and what are the true meanings of decarbonization and electrification. Because the short answer is there is no contrast between these two phenomena. Actually, the first is the reason why we may hope that the second will act faster, easier, and in harmony with goals of sustainability. In the past decade, so the numbers, the figures that you have reminded to all of us are astonishing, and I think are represent a problem of the same magnitude of the climate change itself, because having 1 billion of people or more, 2 billion with a frugal access to electricity, to energy, is a problem that has the same, let's say, ethical magnitude of the problem of maintaining the globe in equilibrium, under my personal opinion. Because you said it's an essential good. I would be more bold on that. Today, in modern terms, electricity, access to electricity as a form of energy must be considered as human right. So it's more than that. Okay, if we stand from this point of view, then we will understand that decarbonization and electrification are exactly two sides, two complementary and avoidable sides of the energy transition. The past decade has been a very intense technological, economical journey that who, like myself, were working in the electricity space, promoting renewables from the technological side, meaning making renewables more reliable, more performing, more safe, more predictable somewhat, and implementable at scale. And on the other side, striving in order to make them economically viable through the push of competition. We can say with satisfaction that that decade could be considered over, in the meaning that we won. Today, the easiest way everywhere around the world to generate decarbonized energy, specifically electricity, is by using renewables, and specifically two technology, wind and solar, which have the beauty of being quite democratic, in the sense that they are well spread around pretty much everywhere, with a very low access barriers, meaning that the technological cost to implement projects of that nature is affordable from many countries, from many energy systems all around the world, including the ones that are desiring to allow access to electricity for a larger number of citizens, prospect consumers. Okay, so today we have a weapon in this battle. We have a solution to this need that became competitive, easy, scalable, reliable, and which journey from this point of view has not ended yet. I mean, the best possibly is yet to come. So renewable will become farther cheaper, farther performing, so that easier to handle, so that there will be the solution pretty much everywhere. As also the big data provider like IEA or other, let's say, scenario makers are indicating. So the 90% of the capacity addition of the next 2 decades will be basically wind and solar. So if we found a way to decarbonize, then we can dream to have electrification in the two meanings we're using this word today. One is the first access to electricity, and the second that is of the same importance, that is gaining to electricity the supply of other energy needs. I mean, supplying with decarbonized electricity energy needs that so far has been satisfied by fossil fuels, by fossil energy sources, so that we can tackle these two things at the same time, because we have a solution. We have the decarbonized electricity, the renewable electricity that is becoming easier and cheaper everywhere. And it's under those principles that we in Enel have, acting in the past, pushing a lot on the decarbonization side, becoming one of the leaders of the renewable energy with Enel Green Power. And now we are dedicating the next decade to the electrification, because we definitely believe that the visible effort, collective visible effort in the next decade, this decade, the decade we're living, so the 2020, 2030 will be solving or accelerating the solution of the first access to electricity, thanks to the fact that we have renewables finally, and gaining space for electric energy, electricity in other uses. And if we can do that with the same level of success that we have obtained in the past decade for renewables, I think we have a hope to go in the direction of, let's say, the Paris Agreement, the sustainability, leaving a hope of prosperity without compromising on sustainability.
That's very optimistic then, in the best sense, and very encouraging. What are some of the markets? I mean, I know NL has a global footprint all over the world. What are some of the markets or some of the regions in which you're first you're putting this into practice? I mean, areas where customers are getting electricity for the first time, but from the base of a grid that is sustainable from scratch.
Let's say the waves of electrifications in the meaning of, let's say, moving, say, through the final consumer decision, using electricity for more energy uses, for new energy uses, will, in the next 10 years, will happen pretty much everywhere, but with waves. What I mean by that, that we will, of course, experience it first in the more, let's say, advanced, economically advanced countries for logical reasons, because the spending power of those consumers will be, let's say, more aligned with the capability to buy, for example, an electric vehicle or to install a heat pumps. So that, and from this point of view, we're seeing signals in our distribution, let's say, in our markets, already in Italy, in Spain, for example, where the request for connection of distributed generation solutions from one side and of, for example, charging points, e-vehicle charging points on the other side are, let's say, increasing, are soaring in a really visible way. So double-digit increment year over year. So we are seeing that the taking over of the electrification is happening probably even faster than what we thought just a few years ago. From this point of view, having a dynamic that is quite similar to the renewable journey that we experienced 10 years ago. You know that the characteristic of the past decade was that year after year, let's say the scenario were always too conservative with respect to the number of new projects or new megawatts installed, and it was a constant of the past 10 years. And I personally believe that we are underestimating the speed with which in many economically advanced countries, the consumers will participate into this, let's say, let's call it fuel switch, okay, in this decarbonization journey through the electrification of their own final consumptions. Of course, we also believe that with a very, very few years time span difference, large metropolitan areas, for example, the megalopolis of South America will follow quite quickly. So we imagine that we will see electric vehicles or, let's say, heat pumps in Sao Paulo, just to make an example, just with a very few years of time span difference with, for example, Europe. So we will see waves, but in general, pretty much everywhere, the solutions are available today. They're becoming very cost effective, technically viable, so that consumers can really move quickly into this direction. And by doing it, they will not only decarbonize their own consumption, but they will build an energy awareness that will be very important in order to drive their, let's say, their choices when they buy other goods for which they don't consume directly, but they consume indirectly energy, and the energy awareness they have built in their direct choices will be absolutely one element of selection for their purchases when they select something they're going to buy. So for example, if I have to buy biscuits today, I can decide to buy brand A and not brand B, because brand A is advertising me that they are manufacturing the biscuits only using renewable sources, for just as a funny example.
Sure.
Okay. At the same time, we are observing that more and more developing countries are finally understanding that if they promote sustainable long-term program for renewable electricity as the main component of the energy matrix in the next years. They are not only, let's say, contributing to the sustainability of their energy matrix, but are also offering an opportunity at several levels, home, small system, mini grids, microgrids, grid connected project, really to implement electrification projects in the meaning of first access to electricity. So that we are seeing that there are few, let's say, pioneering countries, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, that are now differentiating themselves in the ambition of solving, trying to tackle the problem with the help of the technology that renewables do represent today. Then finally, let's not forget that a very important part of the problem of electricity gap, of the energy gap, is not in remote far area, but it's just in the peri-urban, let's say, neighborhood of large metropolitan cities. So there is a very fine line between, let's say, the availability of energy and a life without electricity. And that's at the same time is a big shame from a certain point of view, but also make it easier from a certain point of view to try to do something material and real to solve the issue. So maybe I am a little bit too optimistic. That's my personal nature. But me, I have more than 20 years of experience in this industry. And many of them I have spent also in projects, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. And I can tell you that it is evident that now we are finally understanding what is really needed in order to be material and, let's say, fast in the implementation of a project that can try to solve the problem that you described perfectly at the beginning.
Sure. Well, it sounds as though, I know often in the context of shared value, we talk about getting product, process, and people correct, and also making sure that all of those factors are inclusive. And with technological developments in clean energy, you've reached a point where the cost barriers to the product, it seems, are no longer a major obstacle when it comes to electrification. You've just been describing a process that makes accessibility and choice part of the presentation of these energy sources to consumers. So that's obviously a positive. Let's talk briefly about the people side of things. Is the project of electrification and a green transition one that we see generating, for example, job opportunities and economic growth beyond just kind of the top elite of engineers and specialists? You know, is that part of the value proposition for a developing economy? Is the chance to create income for people in building this infrastructure?
Absolutely, yes. And first of all, let's be more precise. The decarbonization, so implementation of renewable project and electrification, and of course, now I'm using this term in the meaning of the important level of investments that are required in the reinforcement of the distribution infrastructure in order to connect the emerging consumptions from one side to the, let's say, the offering of renewable electricity on the other side, are two industrial applications, two industrial sectors that are capable to multiply the job creation per, let's say, $1 million invested. So both renewables and grid technologies typically can offer let's say, an impact of job creation that is very positive and typically higher of the ones of the conventional technologies, energy technologies. Most importantly, for the grid expansion, so for the investments in distribution grids, what is very important is that the investments are local. So a very important portion of the investments are physical builds, physical activities that are, of course, realized on the territory that is hosting the grid. So involving crews, technicians, workers, blue collars. So all the scale of capabilities for very, let's say, basic working skills to all the chain, all across the chain, up to skilled engineers, digital engineers, and so far and so on. So there is a spillover, a visible, calculable spillover effect, both on the renewable industry and in the grid infrastructure industry, that are absolutely positive and involving local enterprises, which in turn, of course, will hire local people for permanent jobs, which is very important. So it's not only during the construction phase, but typically the number of jobs that are created for the maintenance and management of those two typology of infrastructure, renewables and the grid, are more in the long term than during the construction phase. So we have the numbers that can prove it, coming from our own experience, but also benchmarking it with the general figures that are available in the market. Mm-hmm. So definitely, yes, there is a very positive spillover effect, not to count what you create as a positive effect for the fact that you are, let's say, investing in the local economy, so needing services and goods around you because you are building an infrastructure that is there for the rest, next 50 years.
Yeah. All of us thinking forward, all of these waves of progress, of course, have to be fueled by a great degree of innovation. What do you do internally within the company and in the leadership to kind of foster a culture of innovation, of experimentation, of exploring the products that are going to be required to build out this 50-year project?
Well, first of all, in our view, innovation and sustainability must go hand to hand together, because there is a new challenge for the innovation effort that is not only to innovate, let's say, evolve technology, but also bring ahead, so the fastest you can, a new technology that can be, let's say, in tune with the ambition of going net zero, reducing the carbon footprint, using more recycled materials, and reduce the carbon footprint of the infrastructure per se. So we have embraced an open innovation approach since a number of years already, which means that we are, let's say, asking questions which answers not necessarily come from the inside, but we open our questions to a more collaborative approach, so that from any possible source all around the globe, through our networks of collaborations, we can receive the best answer, because we cannot know everything by ourselves. So we've been quite humble from this point of view. We have to say, though, that we are one of the largest grid operator, one of the largest renewable company in the world. So we have also built over time a quite unique technical knowledge. So, for example, in the field of grid digitalization, we became an absolute market leader. So some of the innovations are, let's say, invented in our lab and are intellectual property that we do own and that we sell to our other grid operators that want to live the similar digitalization journey to us. But in general, other than this specific field, we are working in a very collaborative, open way in order to get the maximum from the network of, let's say, labs, innovation hubs, relationship with universities, and the technological companies that we've built all around the globe.
Thanks, Antonello. This is all really enlightening and inspiring to hear. Several of our viewers have submitted questions through our Q&A function, and some of them are pretty interesting. So in the time left to us, I'd love to foreground a couple of them. One guest asked about the intermittent aspect of solar and wind. In practice, how much of a challenge is the storage problem, essentially, to these non-renewable energy sources? What is NL doing to try to combat that, especially with regard to storage and battery technology?
Yeah, well, first of all, in most of the country where we do operate with our grids and with our power plants, we have a quite important number of hydropower plants, which are, in my opinion, will be the natural batteries of the future. So we will use more and more hydropower as a natural batteries from one side. On the second level of answer is that the evolution of batteries, most of the evolution of the battery has yet to be seen so far. So we have in front of us a very important technological evolution of this technology, not necessarily in the lithium-ion batteries, electrochemical battery solution. So there are many fields of investigation, of innovation that will bring safer, cheaper, bigger storage capabilities. Again, not necessarily only electrochemical ones. So gravity, compressed air. So there are many liquid air or flux batteries, solid state. So there are many technologies that are in the lab today that are exiting from the lab quite quickly that will represent an opportunity.
Yes.
So hydro, batteries, the combination of wind and solar, so much wind and much solar together, flexibility, the key words of the next 10 years will be flexibility, flexible generation and flexible consumptions will help the grid operators to manage the power flows from both sides. Then there would be a little role, in my opinion, somebody thinks they will be bigger, but of the hydrogen and very little gas in the transition period. And then we will be, so we dream, we plan, because we believe it's doable, that one day we will be completely decarbonized and we will have only renewables in the grids. If you are skeptical about it, just measure how many days in Europe there are countries or important part of energy markets that are going per days after days purely with renewables. It's doable.
What role does, and here again, I'm channeling a question from our audience, what role does nuclear energy play in the future that you're aspiring to?
The real honest answer is that I don't know, because it's a very complex question. Today, it looks like there are not so, let's say, positive perspectives. The main reason I think are twofold. The one is we lack standardization, and to have a intrinsically safe, advanced nuclear technology, we would need a level of standards, a global standardization that is not happening today. So it's not happening. And if it starts to happen now, you need 20, 30 years to come up with a new technology. The second is that most of the electricity sector is now in the hands of private company. And the risks of a development of a nuclear project, it's just unbearable from the private company. So that's, I think, is a hurdle that we have to. Now, if the evolutions of batteries and renewables will continue with the speed that we have experienced in the last years, maybe we don't need nuclear for the future. But again, it's a very difficult prediction to be done.
Sure, absolutely. Antonello, we've come pretty close to the end of our time, and I want to thank you again so much for making the time to talk with our audience and to talk with me. I'm very grateful for it. We have about 30 seconds left. Would you like to leave the audience with any last words?
Yes, I think the last words are for the consumers. And by consumers, I mean all of us. The energy transition will happen if we take our part as consumers, as citizens, as energy consumers. We understand that we have an immense power in our hands, and we have to consume less and consume better. So we have to consume only sustainable power directly in our homes and being energy aware and try to buy only goods that are manufactured in a sustainable way. If we start collectively to do that, then yes, we have a hope to be on time by 2030.
Thank you, Antonello, and thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you so much, Antonello and Matt. That was a wonderful discussion, and I think some of the ideas you touched on about energy as a human right, the idea of renewables being a democratic form of energy, and so much on the process of what the next decade of electrification will look like were really inspiring. Next up is a short video message from one of our global partners, the Shared Value Project, based in Australia. Let's hear from CEO Sarah Downey.
Hello from Australia. I'm thrilled to join you all today as we discuss, no doubt, the most critical and urgent need of our time, how we transition to a more sustainable future. Before I start, I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land that I'm joining you from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future, and extend that respect to all First Nations people present today. Well, there's no denying that we are seeing the impact of climate change all too clearly in this part of the world. Last summer, we experienced bushfires that burnt more than 20% of our temperate forests and killed, sadly, more than 1 billion animals. An unfathomable cost to life, also presenting unprecedented economic costs. Natural disasters cost the Australian economy more than $27 billion every year, a cost that is expected to double by 2050. Yet there was a real fear that we would turn up to COP26 without a 2050 net zero commitment. But whilst we have been slow, and I think that's been polite from a government point of view, it really is the business community that has stepped in and stepped up. And we've certainly seen that from our shared value community here in Australia. 3 of our members, IAG, National Australia Bank and Arup, joined forces more than a year ago now to create a resilience investment vehicle that would unlock real investment for climate adaptation and infrastructure. And in the circular economy, we're also seeing business lead. And in fact, once again, a shared value partner, Nestle Oceania, has convened those across its value chain to drive new innovation and really push for major recycling infrastructure, which will enable the development of food-grade soft plastics, the first of its kind. The tide is turning in Australia, and we have an awful lot to lose from rising temperatures. Industry leaders are not waiting for policy changes. We know that today's problems are too big for any one actor, and it will take true cross-sector collaborations, and it will take those collaborations to a whole new level. So I commend the Shared Value Initiative, our Australian shared value community, and you for the leadership you are all taking and the cooperative way in which you are applying it. In this 10th year of shared value, it's really encouraging to think about how far we've come. We're also very aware of how far we have yet to go. Thank goodness we'll be doing it together. Thanks again for having me, and I'm really looking forward to listening and being a part of the rest of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your perspective from Australia and for the work you do to advance shared value. Next is our final fireside chat for the day, and it features 2 CEOs whose organizations partner together. They'll be in conversation focused on reducing resource consumption while increasing growth. Enrique Lourdes is the president and CEO of HP Inc. He joined the company as an engineering intern in 1989 and held various positions in senior leadership before becoming CEO in 2019. Under his leadership, the company announced an ambitious sustainable impact agenda with goals to reverse climate change, advance human rights, and accelerate digital equity. M. Sanjan is a global conservation scientist whose work spans from genetics to wildlife migration to nature's impacts on human well-being. He has served as Conservation International's Chief Executive Officer since 2017. Sanjan, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And I'm really delighted to be here with Enrique Lourdes, who's a real leader in this field and a bit of a hero of mine. And we'll get to that in a second, but let me just sort of set the frame here, if I might. So basically every aspect of society, every aspect of our lives, whether how we eat, how we drink, how we travel, how we access medicine, how we access our finances has been massively, massively influenced and impacted by technology. And I think the last couple of years has shown the value of technology in fundamentally helping to shape our lives. And in this case, for the positive. Imagine this pandemic hitting at a time that was before our ability to sort of work from home, go to school from home, carry out all of our work from home, and also think about the technological advances that happen in terms of making the vaccines available so quickly. Really is, sort of almost miraculous. And yet technology writ large has had a massive impact on our planet. Much of it is unseen by most people, most consumers, by myself. I didn't know some of these things until you start digging in a little bit. Devices that we once thought, and I think this I can say in my lifetime, would last for 10, 20, 30 years. I distinctly remember the first IBM at the time, IBM computer that I got as an undergraduate, and what a sort of ceremony it was to unpack it from the box and set it up, and thinking, well, this thing is going to be in there, at least as long as I have my car. And clearly that didn't work out. Today, the average lifespan is 4 or 5 years for most of these devices, if not less. And in terms of global emissions, we're talking about an industry that has global emissions that is essentially on par with the airline sector. A sector in terms of airlines that gets a lot of scrutiny. And I would say in terms of technology, a sector that has maybe to some extent been under the radar and certainly has gotten away with it. Over the last 8 days, I've been in Glasgow. And one of the things that I have noticed in Glasgow is the enormous, and I would say for the most part, positive influence that businesses are playing now at COP. There's a marked difference from when I recall going to the Paris Climate Conference 5 years ago to today in terms of businesses and the financial sector and the technology sector, and the way in which they have kept the agenda moving forward, even when governments at times have stumbled. That's partly why I am so thrilled to be speaking to Enrique today about HP's journey to solve this enormous challenge about how we can, yes, rely on these technologies to help make our lives better, but at the same time, reduce their footprint and reduce the energy consumption, make them more reusable and recyclable, and also how these technologies can influence our lives in ways in which we can ultimately be less carbon intensive. Enrique, essentially grew up at HP. He's one of those rare CEOs who's taken on a storied firm, one of the companies that really put Silicon Valley on the map, and did it from the inside, starting in as an intern and an engineer and working his way up the company. So in terms of perspective, he has that. So Enrique, let me just start by welcoming you today, and then just picking on something that your company has really gone out and talked about, which is saying that HP really aims to be the most sustainable and just technology company in the world. And you've established these ambitious goals around climate, human rights, and digital equity. And I would say in some ways, HP, I think, has been punching well above, its weight class. What do they mean to you? What do they mean to this company? And why have you been so, should I say, almost provocative in pushing the bar when it comes to climate action, human rights, and equity?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, Sanjan, thank you for all the very kind words, and thank you for having me here. I think you kind of introduced the topic in a perfect way. I think we are living one of the most consequential eras in modern history. And I think everybody, including companies, have a critical role to play. And this is why at HP, we decided to have a bold goal. We decided that we wanted to really make a contribution in the direction that we think the world needs to change. And we decided not only to declare what our objectives were, but make this one of the top priorities of the companies. And when we look at the next 10 years, becoming the most sustainable and just technology company is something that inspires us, not only in terms of how activities we put in place from a sustainability perspective, but really in terms of how we redefine our businesses. How do we change how we design products, how do we build products, how do we distribute products, and also what type of business models we create. So this is really what we are going to be doing to really support the objectives that we have. And then in terms of objectives, we decided to align our efforts around 3 areas. One is climate action, when we have declared that by year 2040, we want to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions, which is a very aggressive goal because we include that for our full value chain, for our full footprint. We have defined.
Sorry, Enrique, what do you mean by full footprint?
I mean, it's not only about how our factories work and what we do inside our offices. It's really from the time do we take the material to produce our products in any part of the world until the products are being used and disposed. This is really the objective that we have defined.
So it's scope 3 as well.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
Because you said it very well. It's not only products are replaced, and we need to think what happens with those when customers will not be using them anymore.
Oh, sorry, keep going. I just interrupted you.
No, but was good. So this is the objective in terms of climate action. We have an objective also related to human rights. And really our focus there is really on diversity, both in terms of gender, but also in terms of any other type of diversity inside the company. And for example, for gender, we have defined that by 2030, we want 50-50 gender equality in executive levels. And we are the first technology company that has declared an objective so aggressive in this space. And the last objective is related to digital equity. Because of the businesses that we have, because of the portfolio that we have, we think we can have an impact in getting people access to technology. So technology doesn't become a divisive factor in our society. And we have the goal of helping 150 million people between now and 2030, not only to get access to technology, but to use technology to have a better way of living, which is really focused more on the outcomes, more than access on technology. And we are doing this because first, we think it's the right thing to do, but also because we think it's the right thing for the business. Business will do better if we achieve these goals. And as we make progress, we will see the impact in our results as well.
Yeah, I'm curious about that motivation. And I want to get to the results in a second, because at the end of the day, we've seen CEOs who have pushed the envelope, sometimes get some pushback from the board or shareholders. And there's real tension there. And I know, and I speak to several of them, and I absolutely feel it. But you grew up within the company, so that's a very unique thing. Do you think this is something that is shared by the vast majority of your team members? Where did you get this spark, if you will, or this gene, if you will, to put the company on the right side of history?
I think there are many different elements, and all of them are converging in the same direction. I think this has become incredibly important for our employees. Our employees see the potential positive impact that we can have, and they want to be part of that journey. Our investors clearly are changing how they look at the company, how they look at business, and the relevance of ESG has radically changed during the last years. Anytime now we do an investor roadshow, what are we doing for ESG has become one of the key questions that we get, and every day is becoming more relevant. The board is pushing strongly for us to evolve in this direction and for us to have a positive impact on the world, but also for this to become a competitive differentiator for the company. And finally, this is really relevant for our customers. We have our business is 50-50 consumer commercial, consumer B2B. In many tenders now, we can participate only if we have significant programs in the sustainability space, because our customers want to see how the work we are doing is going to help them to achieve their goals. And we need to really have a very clear way and transparent way of sharing the progress we make so our customers can reflect that as well. And this is tremendously important for consumers as well. More and more, as consumers, we want to buy products, not because they are nice, not because they work well. This is always important, but also because we believe the brand behind those products is a brand that we want to be partnering with, that we like the values that the brand represents. So it's also very important for our consumers. And we believe this is going to become even more important in the future.
And is it also personal for you in some regards?
And of course, this is personal to me. I think as a CEO of the company, but also as a father and one day a grandfather, I want to leave to my grandkids a better world than the world I got from my grandparents. And I think this, by leveraging the capacity that now I have as a CEO, I can really have an impact. And when I think at HP, I think about it from two different perspectives. I think at it as a company, as a community. So we need to make sure that within the community, we perform as we think we should, but also we are an incredible platform to influence the world because of the partners that we have, because of the supply chain footprint. And as an individual, having the ability to drive that and to have an impact is something personally extremely rewarding and extremely important for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about that business part of it because it's quite impressive. So you've reported over $1 billion in new sales from HP's sustainable impact efforts. And that's pretty impressive to see that you as a company can grow while decreasing your impact on climate and on the natural world. What is that portfolio what is it actually made up of?
I think, first of all, I think I dispute the fact that companies need to choose between having a positive impact and having strong results. I think business results. I think it's possible to do both. And I think in the future, it's going to be even more possible. As you said, we report every year the amount of business that we win because of our work in sustainability. And for the last 2 years, we have reported that we won more than $1 billion per year. And this is because many companies, to participate in their acquisition processes, in their RFQs, we need to submit our programs, our plans around sustainability. If we didn't have them, we will not be able to participate in those tenders. And this is a trend that is growing, is not declining. When we look at what we do, I think it's all about defining the goals, defining where we want to go, and then letting the teams really dream and create their own magic on how do we get there. But if you think about some of the things that we have done during the last years, our PCs are now fundamentally made with ocean-bound plastic that would have gone to the oceans. It is not happening anymore. We take that plastic and we use it to build our PCs. That's incredibly important for our customers and also incredibly motivating for our employees as they develop these products. We have built, for example, in Haiti, plants to get plastic bottles from the ocean, recycle them, and with those bottles, we produce our supplies, our cartridges for ink for our printers. That's an incredible activity also, has a very positive impact, and also is very motivating for our teams. We are working with our suppliers in terms of what is the code of conduct that we want them to have in terms of the employees that they use, how they manage them, how they pay them. So all these things then have an impact end to end, and is really why we believe we are making so much progress in this space.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk a little bit about the supply chain, because I think that's a place where a lot of companies get into trouble, or they become very challenged. You can't open the papers today without reading something about the supply chain and where it's, essentially gunked up. And I think that, a few years ago, a decade or two ago, companies were making choices simply based on price. But now there's a lot more factors that come in. And I think some of the early choices companies have made have come back to haunt them now in challenges in terms of that supply chain. How do you think about that supply chain and ensuring that sustainability is there, end to end?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, I look at the company as a platform, and as a platform that can really influence many, many different parts of the world. And supply chain is clearly one of the areas where we can have more impact. We were one of the first companies that created a code of conduct for our suppliers. In fact, we published it, the first version, in 2008. So it's a long time ago where we really identified that this was something where we really needed to focus and make sure that we had a strong impact. And I have to say that our suppliers have been responded to it very well in 2008. We constantly monitor and audit how things are made, and we can see the progress that has been made, and the fact that now that we can say that all our suppliers are behaving according to our code of conduct, and that we really are having a positive impact anywhere we have factories or our suppliers have factories that feed our factories.
What are you most excited about in terms of your business and the sustainability part of your business or regenerative part of your business as you look forward? Can you give me a sense of what I might expect?
Yeah, let me answer the question. And then I have a question also for you. I'm going to violate a little bit the protocol, but since you have so much visibility, I want to ask a question also to you. I think the area where I feel more proud of is the overall progress we are making and what is the spark of that I can see in the HP employees when we talk about this and about the progress we are going to be making. When I talk in any internal meeting about this being a priority, the need to make progress, the need to change, and the ambitions that we have in this space, you can see the energy that this creates in the teams. You can see the teams, the engineering teams really start thinking, okay, how can we do things better? You can see the supply chain teams thinking, okay, how can we redesign our footprint, or what type of new programs we can put in place? You can see the sales teams thinking, how do I position this to my customers? And creates a vibrant energy that is, I think, contagious, and I think is really helping us to win and to lead. So that really motivates me every day that I come to work and really think this is important. But let me turn it to you and ask you, I think, an important question. You have visibility across many different industries. You partner with many companies. What do you think companies should be doing in this space to continue to lead and to continue to differentiate? What are the key things that you think it will be important for us to focus?
Well, it's been such a strange, couple of years that I think everything I knew before, you almost had to throw out the window and rethink it. So one of the things that I saw over the lockdown, over the pandemic, was that the companies that were leaders, they continued to lead. In fact, they accelerated. CI has been working with HP for almost a decade now, and we have a great partnership, of course. And HP is an example of this. HP Inc. is an example of this, but other companies we worked with as well, the best in class. I'd say everyone except maybe the airline industry, which actually suffered it in a different way, in a quite existential way. Every single one of those companies doubled down or tripled down on their commitments. It was an extraordinary moment of very high ambition. And the analogy I use is sort of a bicycle race, right? So, I cycle sometimes to work, and I noticed that I can only overtake someone if I'm on an uphill. You can never pass someone on the flat or downhill, but when there's a hill coming, I know this is my moment that I can actually pass someone. And I think the best companies in the headwinds are often step up and be their best. Another thing that I noticed is that these commitments that CEOs make, because they are under pressure to make those commitments, only come true if the team members within the company and the customers within the company really understand that commitment. I certainly have seen where CEOs have made a commitment with absolutely no opportunity for the company to really deliver that in a way that won't be seen as greenwashing, in a very real way. And I think people are becoming much more sensitive to that. We don't want to just see great announcements. COP was full of this, right? It wasn't the road to Glasgow that mattered. It was the road from Glasgow that mattered. And the new level of accountability is certainly there. I think thinking long-term is key. One thing I know for sure, Enrique, which I can say with absolute certainty, nature will be more valuable tomorrow than it is today. 100%, 1000% sure of that. So I know that anything you're doing that is nature positive, that is climate positive, Your investments that you're making today will pay off. What I don't know is the timeline, but I know it is going to be better tomorrow than today, right? So the trend is there. And then two other quick things. Companies now, particularly tech companies, are sitting on lots of money with very little room to actually invest it. The market is strange today. I am seeing more companies willing to use their balance sheet. And I don't mean corporate giving. I don't mean philanthropy. Mm-hmm. I mean actually use their balance sheet in very clever ways to invest in ways. We're doing a restoration fund, for example, to invest in ways that will give them a long-term return around nature, around carbon, while still maintaining that money on their balance sheets. So the Treasury Department in the company doesn't get excited because they think the money's walking out the door. That's been a really interesting trend to see. And the final thing I'd say is that, and this is almost a wish that I have, and I say I have this wish even for you. You are such a great advocate for this. I see other CEOs like Alan Jope at Unilever, Tim Cook and others. When you lend your voice to a conservation message, to an environmental message, it goes a long, long way, much further than when I can lend my voice. And I want to see companies to take a much more aggressive role in telling that story, because it's an important story to tell. And I think the consumers are ready to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that you might have? We are down to the last few minutes. I guess I would, let me just maybe frame it this way. Your wanted founder, one of your founders, David Packard, you've frequently quoted him saying that the betterment of society is not a job to be left to a few. It's a responsibility to be shared by all. I want to ask you about culture, because it's very important to me and how we grow Conservation International as well. As a leader, how do you foster a purpose-driven, a values-driven culture?
So I think, as you said, we at HP have been focusing on this since the company was founded more than 80 years ago. And therefore, having grown in the company, it makes it easier because it's really ingrained already in the culture of the company. But at the same time, I think what we need to do is to make sure that we continue to drive it, we continue to evolve it, and we continue to make it more relevant than ever. And we are an engineering company, and it means we like processes, we like metrics, we like goals. And one of the things we do is we make sure that everybody in the leadership team, one of his or her MBOs is related to sustainability. And when I say one of them, we only have 3 or 4 per person. So it's really critical and really important for everybody to have kind of the relevance that we put in place. And this is then cascaded to all the different groups. And we have metrics that we track per quarter, per month, per year, to make sure that we are making progress and we're moving in the right direction. Now, this is what we do because of the type of company we have and the type of businesses that we manage. So we basically take the same processes we use to manage the business to monitor the progress in this space. But I think what this really means is we are making this a priority. All the management team, all the leadership team is behind it. We make this part of what we care, what we review, what we discuss. And by doing that, we make sure that we continue to make this one of the key areas of focus of the company. I personally am very optimistic about the progress we think we will be able to make because of the energy that I see every day behind this.
I watched an interview with you, I think on MSN, where you talk about empathy. And it was fantastic to hear, a CEO of a technology company, an engineer, nonetheless, not that engineers can't have empathy, but it definitely caught me that you led with that. And I thank you for your leadership. I know your company's, really doing well, and it's fantastic to see the new product lines. I have an HP printer right there, by the way, just so you know. But really appreciate your leadership. Keep speaking out about this. Keep leading your company. And thank you so much.
No, thank you. And let me close with one thought. You asked me about what I feel proud of. Every time you print with your printer, remember that printing with HP is forest positive, because we are committed to plant trees to compensate for any paper that is used in our printers that is not coming from sustainable forests. And I think that's an important sign of the commitment that we have, and one of the ways we think we are going to have a positive impact. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well done. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining this incredible conversation with the CEO of HP Inc., Enrique Lores. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrique and Sanjan, for that really important discussion about what it means to sustainably grow a business, while also thinking about the impact on the earth and also the people around us. Next is a compelling short keynote from millennial voice Natalie Kyriakou, an award-winning social entrepreneur, CEO of My Green World, board advisor, and environmental and social growth driver at PwC. She has advised world leaders on environmental and social policy and driven the expansion, growth, and impact of a range of social enterprises and nonprofits around the world. A recognized global emerging leader, Natalie was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for her services to wildlife and environmental conservation in 2018. And in the same year was a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree in recognition of her social entrepreneurship. Let's hear from Natalie.
I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I stand today. For me, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my deepest respects to elders past, present, and emerging. In the year I was born, Time magazine made a rare departure from its tradition of naming a man or person of the year. It named Endangered Earth as Planet of the Year instead. 33 years later, I stand before you with a simple request. Step aside. Step aside and make room for the voices of the people most affected by the climate crisis. Because we have had half a century to address this crisis, and we have failed. The headlines, commitments, and momentum behind climate change today is despite us, not because of us. So I am here to pay my respects to the brave young people who took to the streets to fight for their future. To Greta Thunberg, who at just 15 years old ignited the world and spurred one of the largest movements in history with the famous words, "How dare you?" To Lisapriya Kangujam, who at 7 years old campaigned to curb high pollution levels in India and make climate change literacy mandatory in school. To Tarzan Uden, a 22-year-old climate activist in Bangladesh, a country particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. To Disha Ravi, Jamie Margolin, Mitzi Jonelle Tan, Nglasati Niati, and the millions of other voices who have done in just 2 years what the entire business and political community could not. Give us hope. My name is Natalie Kyriakou, and I am the CEO of My Green World, the environmental, social, governance, business development lead at PwC, and a board advisor and writer. I started an organisation called My Green World in 2013. Our mission is to inspire curiosity in wildlife and environmental conservation through youth-focused education and technology. My role in the environmental space has evolved over the years, where I have the privilege of writing for publications, speaking at events, and working with governments and companies around the world to support their transition to a more environmentally and socially equitable future. I am one of the growing number of people who are aiming to demonstrate that climate action is both a moral and economic imperative. And my intention here is not to shame or diminish the efforts of the many of us who have worked tirelessly to advance climate action and contribute to our global economy, but rather to refocus the lens through which we view young people and diverse voices. Don't underestimate these voices. They are your customers, your workforce, the shapers of your future policy, the heirs to the planet, and the often silenced architects of the climate movement. In 2004, Wangari Maathai became the first African woman and the first environmentalist to win a Nobel Peace Prize. She said, "You cannot protect the environment unless you empower people, you inform them, and you help them understand that these resources are their own, that they must protect them." The world is embarking on a period of transition that is going to impact every single person on Earth in really profound ways. As we move towards a zero carbon economy, we have a unique opportunity to write a new world story that places social inclusion and environmental stewardship at the centre. This is a just transition, one that seeks to leave no person behind as we move on this journey to radically transform our relationship with the environment and its people. And for too long, there's been a widespread view that economic development and environmental sustainability are incompatible. But fortunately, the economic benefits of addressing climate change and social inequity are clear. Environmental and social leadership is a key determinant of financial strength, but the cost of inaction is high. According to Swiss Re, for example, by 2050, the world economy is set to lose up to 18% of GDP from climate change if no action is taken. The transition to the economy of the future will fundamentally reshape the role of businesses, governments, investors, civil society, workforces, and communities. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change says the transition is going to affect nearly 1.5 billion workers across the world, and that is scary. But climate action does not create job losses. Poor investment, poor policy, and lack of inclusion and poor planning create job losses. So let's respect the contribution that workers in fossil fuel industries have made to today's prosperity. But let's also provide support, retraining, upskilling, redeployment, and mobilisation for the climate-defined future that is coming, whether we like it or not. And there are questions on each of our minds. The fossil fuel era must end, but what happens to the communities that it built? How do we make sure not to widen inequalities in the process? What jobs will be lost? What is our plan? What is the role of government, of business, of NGOs, of community? And I don't have all of the answers. I only hope that I can add to the meaningful dialogue that is taking place around the world. The transition will not happen by itself, and we can't rely on one single solution or one single person. It requires a multi-pronged collective approach with diverse voices embedded in the decision-making. Technology and innovation will play a huge role in a just transition. But technologies like renewable energy, carbon capture, biofuels, electric vehicles, they're not silver bullets. And equally, identity and entrenched us versus them attitudes, which create that narrative of two opposing forces warring over unsolvable differences, will also need to be reconsidered. We all have a role in understanding that identity dimension of climate action and working to create a collective we. We need to acknowledge and address anxieties towards change transparently and with empathy. And for governments and their leaders, just transition offers the opportunity to address climate change, growing inequality, and social inclusion. For workers, critical support is required at a community level with emphasis on reskilling and redeployment. Capturing and elevating the diverse voices of the workforce is absolutely critical. And for fossil fuel dependent communities, investment in new energy, new industries, and new skills is vital. Listening and engaging meaningfully is imperative. For cities, investment in circular economy, cultural heritage, Indigenous land, zero emissions transport, and clean energy are the way forward. For industry, switching to renewable energy should be built on the foundations of clean industrial processes and transparent supply chains. And every single step of the way, we need to be working with communities, understanding the context and ensuring that community voices are enshrined in the decision-making mechanisms. Momentum is already building at a rapid rate. Governments around the world are ramping up their climate policies with more ambitious emissions reductions targets. More than 130 countries have now set or are considering a target of reducing emissions to net zero by mid-century. And roughly 1,000 of the largest companies around the world have set net zero targets to reduce their emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. No business can afford to ignore the economic, social, and environmental costs of inaction. As the UN puts it, to achieve our climate goals, every company, every financial firm, every bank, insurer, and investor will need to change. And we can look to a range of governments and businesses around the world who are embarking on a just transition, and we can learn from them. They are imperfect examples, but provide a guide for us. In Germany, the Bavarian Metalworkers Union and Friends of the Earth collaborated in order to identify how local workers could best transition to roles in the low-carbon economy. In Canada, a commitment to phase out coal-fired electricity was coupled with a national task force made up of industry, labour, environment and coal community representatives. And this group travelled across the country to listen to Canadians regarding the support and government policies they would need to build back stronger through the transition. The Italian company Enel similarly developed a dialogue and agreement with its Italian union partners to focus on retention, redeployment, reskilling and early retirement for elderly workers as they began to decarbonise. Just in 2021, earlier this year, the Global Commission on People-Centred Clean Energy Transitions was established to bring together government leaders, ministers and prominent thinkers, and it's driven by the belief that successful energy transitions must enjoy public support and provide clear public benefits. In each of these cases, the people affected by the transition were part of the decision-making process. A common thread was an understanding of the local context, a willingness to capture a diversity of voices and stories, and a commitment to truly engage and truly listen. The world is watching closely as an ambitious new wave of climate action takes place. Our failure to act over the past half-century has left us with little choice but to mobilise a wartime-like effort to address climate change. But the question is, who will be at the table? So I ask again, let us in your boardrooms, join us in our communities. Listen to us, learn from us, share with us, teach us, because we are you and there is no us and them in a just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for those really inspiring remarks, and also for the call for all of us to support a just transition. The global efforts and the themes that Natalie mentioned really underscore some of what we've heard today from all of our speakers, addressing equity, making room for new voices, and in particular, including those who are most impacted in the decision-making processes. And the examples that Natalie highlighted underscore the importance of partnership. This is everyone's work, and it will take partnership among the private sector, government, civil society, and all of us. Thank you again to all of the speakers who shared their work with us today. I know I'm leaving with a deeper ambition to support a just transition, and also a more detailed sense of what that work really looks like in practice. Now it's my pleasure to turn to Mark Kramer, co-founder of FSG and the Shared Value Initiative, and Bobby Silton, Managing Director of the Shared Value Initiative, to close us out for the day and for the 3-day summit. Mark and Bobby, over to you.
Thanks so much, Laura. And you've been a terrific MC today, and we really appreciate you hosting such an informative set of conversations on climate action. And welcome, Mark. It's good to share the stage with you as we move to the final segment of our summit. I'm going to just provide some perspective. 3 days ago, we started this summit by acknowledging how unequal the world is. And Dan Schulman of PayPal said it really well when he spoke about economic inclusion. He said, it's expensive to be poor. This is a pivotal moment for the private sector to demonstrate its leadership to driving to more equitable outcomes, particularly leveraging the core business. I think we heard that again and again in all the conversations. I also want to acknowledge that while the private sector still has a lot of work to do, we at FSG and the Shared Value Initiative have work to do as well, as we all want to put equity at the center of corporate purpose and shared value. It's easy to become overwhelmed by the challenges that confront society and be daunted by the work ahead, but I do remain hopeful. And Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation spoke on our first day, and I think he said it well when he said that hope is the oxygen of our democracy. I'm also hopeful because nearly 2,200 people registered from around the world for this summit, and it says a lot that leaders from the private sector and civil society are seeking ideas to deliver better solutions. This is a moment for a great pivot to a different way of doing business when society needs us most. And we listened to some really compelling examples this week, such as PayPal's efforts to democratize financial services for greater economic inclusion. Unilever's commitment to pioneering new employment models as we navigate the future of work. We heard how Hollywood from Franklin Leonard can create value for society and business by addressing anti-Black bias in the film industry. Merck is putting patients at the center of their work and their voices to deliver greater access to health. Rockefeller Foundation and Abbott are using data in new ways to change health outcomes. And Procter & Gamble is using its marketing prowess to change harmful narratives about gender and particularly stereotypes that limit and minimize girls. And yesterday, we closed out with Discovery Limited. Their CEO, Adrian Gore, talked about behavioral data and how it's being used to increase our health span, not just our lifespan. And then today we heard some breakthrough efforts from REI, Enel, and HP to address climate change through their innovative approaches. And finally, we heard so poignantly from Natalie that young people need us to act and they want their voices and ideas included. I'm now going to hand it over to Mark to say a few words, and then I'll be back to officially close our event. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Bobby, and thanks for those great remarks and reminders of some of the terrific presentations that we've heard these last couple of days. I really do have to say that these presentations, this conference, feels to me like a very important source of hope. To hear these terrific stories about what companies are actually doing, and not doing merely on the periphery of their operations, not doing merely as a public relations stunt, but really embracing the idea of purpose, recognizing the essential nature of equity, and confronting the transition that we need to make to move from an economic model that is destroying our planet to one that operates synergistically with the needs of our planet and nature. It's hard to watch what's going on in Glasgow with COP26 without a sense that we have failed at the challenge of eliminating climate change. It seems that we are on a path, whether it is 2 degrees Celsius, 2.5 degrees Celsius, it is a path of significant change in our global climate. But having failed to meet the challenge to date does not mean that we must fail going forward to limit further damage. And even more importantly, let us not fail the test of equity that will result from the very disproportionate consequences of the climate change that is already happening. I think, too, we have to confess that we have not met the challenge of inequality of wealth. It continues to grow. But let us not let that failure hold us back from ensuring that everyone has at least a living wage that enables them to provide for themselves and their family, and that has the opportunity for economic advancement in whatever region of the world they might live. We've spent a fair amount of time over the last few days talking about the issues of racial equity, the importance of equity to the success of business, and of course, the moral imperative that underlies our commitment to equity. But we can't ignore the opposition. We cannot ignore those who so vociferously deny the challenges of equity, who are using equity, and in the US, critical race theory, as a flashpoint for protest and increasingly violent response. But I have a rather subversive thought to offer you in response to that. The business case for equity is real. But one of the nice things about business is that they have to be rational in their decision making. They need to make the choices that are in the economic interests of the company. Company management is fundamentally reality-based. In a way, much of the political controversy going on in our country and in many countries in the world today are not reality-based. So I think that when we make the business case for equity, we do not in any way undermine the moral case, but it's just possible we might be able to sidestep all of the political furor that is surrounding the equity debate today. If we can say this is in the economic interest of our company and our shareholders, and find the real basis for that argument in the math, we manage to avoid the ideological fight of whether this is a good path or a bad path, of whether there are winners and losers who resent the thought that they might lose. So I think there is a subversive reason to treat equity as an opportunity for creating shared value and economic success for our companies. It enables us to do what is right and what is necessary with a rationale that cannot be defeated by contrary ideology. The last thought I want to leave you with, as I mentioned in my remarks the other day, is that shared value, I have come to believe, is a personal choice. There are ways to make money that are harmful to society, that continue inequity and oppression. But there are as many or more ways to make money that help promote a just and equitable and sustainable society. I believe it is up to each of us to decide which choice we want to make. And shared value is a roadmap for making what I believe is the more rewarding choice. After all, the search for meaning in life, as Viktor Frankl has said, is one of the great motivators of humanity. And it has been a privilege for me to discover that in pursuing the idea of shared value and creating shared value for others in the world, I've been able to find a new degree of meaning in my own life. And I wish for each of you the opportunity to do the same. Thank you so much for being with us these last few days. Thank you for your support of the Shared Value Initiative. And thank you for the work you are doing in each of your organizations to help promote a better world. Bobby, back to you.
Mark, thank you so much for those really powerful closing words. You've given us a lot to think about, and we just so appreciate everything that you do in partnership with the Shared Value Initiative. But we're also just delighted that we get to share you with the broader Shared Value community, because I know that we all appreciate your new ideas and thinking and for pushing us forward. The world definitely needs that. So thank you. I also just want to thank our amazing sponsors, Merck, 3M, Abbott, HCA Healthcare, Procter & Gamble, and Sanofi for their generous support of this summit and making it available and free to the public. I also want to express gratitude for all our presenters and our MCs for engaging, informing, and inspiring all of us these last 3 days. We're going to be sending out an email to all attendees with links to the recording. So if you didn't get a chance to catch everything, you can certainly do that online. And although they did not appear on the virtual stage over these 3 days and have been working behind the scenes to make this summit come alive, I want to give a big shout out to the Shared Value Initiative team, Alicia Dunn, George Eckert, Gail Gershon, and Imani Hicks. I just want to thank them all for making this possible. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, and importantly, for doing the work that you do every day to create a more just and equitable world. Thank you, and we hope to see you at another Shared Value Initiative event soon.